Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Amnesia Rush, which is sort of a different flavour of Light Galaxy since we now have three. We have the Secret Order build, we do have the Reverie build, which is kind of a multi-attacking build, and now we have this one, which is all based around Galactica Amnesia, which is a very interesting boss monster, if we can even call it a boss monster. So it's level 6 and only has 1600 attack, which is quite pitiful for a boss monster's stats, but we can place one card from your hand on the bottom of your deck and special summon two, has to be exactly two, level 6 or lower galaxy type normal monsters from your graveyard face up to your field. This turn you can only attack with galaxy type monsters, but 6 and lower, so we can summon level 4s off of this, but specifically we want to get out 2 6s ideally, but then you might ask yourself, okay, well, what does getting 2 6s out do? Because we have Galactica Ganzel, which is a 2100 attack, and we also have Safer, which is a 2000 attack, but getting out a 16, a 21, and a 2000 doesn't really do much. Well, our skill does help us get these guys out, as well as give us at least a little bit of a reason for summoning them. So first off, we can only special summon monsters whose original level is 7 once per duel. So this is in here basically to try and stop us or dissuade us from playing Secret Order, or at least not max out on it. Can be activated if your constructed deck contains no level 7 or higher effect monsters, and all of the monsters are light attribute galaxy type monsters. So again, quite a harsh restriction, but again, this really wants us not to really try and abuse anything with this, and just focus on getting our 3 level 6s onto the board. We can send one level 6 or higher normal monster from your deck to the graveyard, so that will already get us one of our level 6s in the graveyard ready to be brought back with Amnesia's effect. Then we can make up to 2 face-up monsters, 1 level 6 or higher normal, and 1 level 6 effect monster. So this is a little bit weird. So first off, we have to have a level 6 monster on the field to activate our skill. Then we can make a level 6 or higher normal monster, which in case of this deck is only going to be level 6s, and it has to be an exactly level 6 effect monster, which in this deck is just going to be Amnesia. On your field, gain 600 attack to the end of this turn. So Amnesia will then climb up to 22, and Ganzel, which is our highest level 6, can go up to 27. Now that in itself is still not really enough to really clear the board, so we do have to get a little bit creative in working out ways to boost our attack. The main way that we found to do that is Galactica Force, just to give all of our normal monsters a big boost. Even if we only have the 2 normals, we can get our Ganzel up to 27, then use Galactica Force to boost it by 600 up to 33, which is enough to clear most threats. Now, that won't clear everything, like 4,000 attackers will still be kind of difficult. If we go against Cynic Drago, for example, it's not going to do too well against that. But in most cases, I do find Galactica Force is enough to deal with threats. The alternative is that you could use Talismanic Seal Array if you're worried about playing against big bosses such as Yggdraga that you couldn't otherwise deal with. Otherwise, Galactica Force is fantastic. But let's go through the card by card. So we've already talked about Amnesia. It's basically the heart and soul of the deck. Using Amnesia is how we get all our plays going. And what we can do on turn 1 is summon out a vanilla, so for example a Sentinel, tribute over it to summon out Amnesia, use our skill to send a Ganzel to the graveyard, then immediately use Amnesia's effect, put a card from our hand back into our deck, special summon back the Ganzel and the Sentinel, and then set 2 cards on the field, which is not a bad opening. Now, against some decks this would be better than others, so for example Dark Galaxy basically just does a bunch of piercing, so you don't really want to have low defense monsters, so against that, this is a fine open. Against some other decks that can punish you for leaving a bunch of monsters in attack mode, maybe not as desirable, but it is an interesting play nonetheless. Then we have 2 Strange Traveler. So Strange Traveler is a bit of a weird one. Sometimes this card is really, really important and can let you deal with some threats. Being able to reduce a monster's attack by 500 can be really good. Again, that will let your Ganzel beat over up to 32. We can crash into a 32, we can beat over 31s, which is pretty good. But it also allows us to mill the top card of our deck, which does get cards in there ready to use Force, ready to use Amnesia. Now, the only real downside of Traveler is that we have to have another face-up galaxy type normal monster on the field, so we can't just summon it, immediately tribute it off for Amnesia, and then use Amnesia to special summon 2 bodies. If we wanted to, for example, Strange Traveler, summon out Sentinel, then use Strange Traveler to weaken, and then tribute it off for Amnesia, because we can only summon 2 and no less than 2, we now can't use Amnesia's effect because Bright Sentinel was stuck on the field. That can get in the way. Other than that, Strange Traveler is still really, really good. Then we're playing Star Trileo, and this card's pretty cool. If we have no other monsters on the field during the turn we normal summon this card, excavate the top 3 cards of your deck. Send all excavated galaxy-type monsters to the graveyard, place the other cards at the bottom of your deck in any order. So this is basically perfect if our board is empty. We slap this down, mill a bunch of cards, ideally get some like 6s into the graveyard. Basically, we just want monsters in the graveyard to use Galactica Force, because in some duels we are activating this 2, maybe even 3 times on a single turn. Then we'll just tribute off the Star Trileo, get our Amnesia, activate the skill, put one of the guys in the graveyard, ideally get another one in the graveyard of Trileo, activate Amnesia, bring them both back again and again and again. And this is basically the loop we want to be going through. So Trileo is just basically the best option we have to fill up our graveyard, especially because we are Galaxy locked. Then there's Linak. Linak is just a fantastic body, 1600 attack. I mean, Sentinel is basically the same except with like less attack. Both of these cards are important because we are going to need normal summons. We are playing 7 high-level monsters, which means occasionally we'll just draw a hand of all bricks and can't do anything. So having as many normal monsters as we can that are just normal summons is going to be really, really important, which is why we've gone for that. Now, moving on to spells, we have 3 copies of Universal Storm. Just back row hate is really good, especially in a very aggressive deck like this. If your opponent has any trap cards to stop you, basically your turn will kind of come to an end. We can't really play around Rice, we can't really play around Buffet Slime, we can't play around Legend Traps, so Universal Storm is basically a must. And sometimes you'll just kind of have to say, well, I'm going to go all in anyway. We're just going to kind of have to YOLO this and hope you haven't got anything, because otherwise this deck doesn't really have much of a grind game. Then there's Tribute to the Doomed as our legend. Tribute to the Doomed is probably the best option for aggressive decks. It's going to be either this or Sword and Shield, but Sword and Shield is not positioned in a great place in the current meta. Not saying it's bad, but Tribute to the Doomed does more, and it allows you to beat set monsters, which is really good. And another card that helps us beat set monsters is Meteor Charge. Being able to give our guys piercing, really, really powerful, as well as change a monster face up. We've already seen how good this card is in the Galactica Order deck. Now, in this deck, we can't search it, so we just have to hard draw it, but it's still very, very powerful. And without it, I feel like this deck would not be remotely playable. Now, I'm not saying this deck is good, but it is at least playable in its current state. Then we have Galactica Force. We've already mentioned this card, but again, it is really, really powerful. Shuffle 3 Galaxy type monsters when we go into the deck, which refills the deck, which is going to be quite good so we don't deck out. As well as we can use this to put back our level 6s in to turn on our skill again, because in order to use our skill, we have to send a 6 to the graveyard. All face-up Galaxy-type normal monsters on your field gain attack equal to the number of face-up normal monsters on the field times 300. Now, we're almost always going to have an Amnesia, but sometimes we contribute over the Amnesia to get out another normal monster. But usually this is going to be at least a 600 boost. If our opponent has normal monsters, we can obviously get a lot higher and get a lot more value off this card. And again, quite often we'll be activating 2 or maybe even 3 of these in a single turn and trying to push in and OTK our opponent. Then for the traps, we have Crisis. Crisis is just so good into so many decks right now. Basically, every deck in the meta, except maybe 1 or 2, special summons from the hand or graveyard, which means Terra's Crisis is almost always at least somewhat useful. I would say this card is still the least useful against Metarian out of the big meta decks, but this will still even affect them when they use Starry Start, so still worth having. Buffet Slime is a almost must right now. Again, kind of bad into Metarion, but good into literally everything else. It is such an important card against both Galaxy decks, against Psychic, for example. It's just so very strong. And then we're on Widespread Ruin, and the reason is Widespread Ruin is a more aggressive Legend Trap when compared to Negate Attack. Negate Attack is safer, but Widespread Ruin will often win you the game off of it if it's used at the correct time. So that's why we're playing it in this deck, because this deck is kind of an all-or-nothing deck. You push in, you go all in, you swarm the board, get your guys as big as they can, force damage in where you can, and ideally end the game as quickly as possible, which is why we've gone with Widespread Ruin, because we really need all the help we can get to achieving that goal. But what do we think of the deck? The deck it's very fun to play. I do actually very much enjoy the play style of this deck. It does remind me a little bit of the old Rider Cross deck, which again, not very good, but very, very fun. This deck can also steal games. Just being able to use Galactica Force and Meteor Charge in combination, if your opponent doesn't have the trap cards to stop you, can get in for a surprisingly high amount of damage and can just end games out of nowhere. So this deck, I wouldn't recommend you take this to a tournament. I wouldn't recommend you play this in the GRF, but it's very fun. If you just want something different and you just kind of want to mess around with something new, I do recommend this deck because it does play on a different axis. It is an enjoyable experience. I just wouldn't expect your win rate to be particularly high. Now, we did actually win quite a lot of games with this, but that was primarily while climbing up the ladder in GRF Stage 1, which, again, if anyone's climbed that ladder, they know that there's a lot of decks in there that are not optimal, let's say, and the players there aren't necessarily rush-dedicated players, so you do end up getting quite a lot of victories. But let's fire on some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.